Joe Pye is an unmistakable wildflower. First of all, it's tall. One frequently must look up to see its large crown of flowers, which range in color from light pink to burgundy to white. Second, it is prevalent and easily spotted along the roadside. And thirdly, it attracts a lot of insects. Flies, wasps, and bees, and especially butterflies. Joe Pye weeds are actually three closely related species: Eutrochium purpureum, Eutrochium maculatum, and Eutrochium dubium. The species are found throughout North America, but mostly in the Appalachians, New England, the Atlantic coast, and the Midwest. The large flowers are made up of hundreds of tiny flowers called florets, best appreciated in the photoscan. The florets are encased and held up by the involucre, itself made up of overlapping bracts called filaries. The male stamens of each floret are dark purple and surround the female style, which is bifurcated at the tip and exerted. Bees visit Joe Pye weed. This one has learned the easy way to get from flower to flower. But perhaps the most dramatic insect visitors to Joe Pye weed are the butterflies, especially the queen of them all, the monarch. But as widespread and conspicuous as Joe Pye weed is in North America, until recently, next to nothing was known about its curious name. Who was Joe Pye? Most sources, including credible wildflower guides and historians, have supposed he was a Native American herbal doctor. Such as this article from the New York Times. As the story goes, there was once an Indian medicine man named Joe Pye who used concoctions from a wild plant found growing in the nearby woods to cure typhoid fever. His brew is said to have halted an epidemic that raged in colonial Massachusetts. Hence, the local plant became forever known as Joe Pye weed. And this from the venerable National Geographic magazine of 1916. Joe Pye weed derives its name from Joe Pye, an Indian herb doctor of Pilgrim days in Massachusetts. It is claimed that he cured typhus fever with decoctions he made from this weed. The source of these stories is most likely Nature's Garden, published in 1917 by Nelchie Blanchin, the pen name for Mrs. Frank Doubleday, wife of the publisher. She wrote in her popular book, Joe Pye, an Indian medicine man of New England, earned fame and fortune by curing typhus fever and other horrors with decoctions made from this plant. To this day, we continue to find the language similar to what Nelchie Blanchin wrote in the early 1900s, all across the internet, in wildflower guides and even academic texts. Joe Pye has become ingrained in the folklore of early colonial America. The story that Joe Pye may have been operating in Salem, Massachusetts at the time of the Pilgrims was easy to trace down. A Google book search for Joe Pye and Salem showed that this combination first appeared in an article by Salem historian Ernest Dodge and anthropologist Frank G. Speck, written in 1945. The two interviewed this man, one William A. P. Luscombe, locally known by all as Catnip Bill. He used to dispense catnip to Salem townsfolk. Catnip Bill told the researchers that many years earlier his father, who had also been an herb doctor, had told him that Joe Pye was an Indian medicine man who had lived near Salem in colonial times and taught the settlers to use Joe Pye weed to cure fever. Although this bit of oral history convinced Speck and Dodge that the legend of Joe Pye might have had its beginning in Salem during the 1600s, it has, through the centuries, remained just that, an unproved legend. But a search by yours truly, again of Google Books, brought up an entirely different story. The famous 18th century Mohican sachem and Christian convert Samson Occam, who was one of the few literate Native Americans, he could read as well as write, kept a diary. The entry for July 14, 1787, reads as follows. Sometime in the morning went to see Joseph Pye, alias Shauquethqueat, and had a very agreeable conversation with him. So at least one Joseph Pye was a flesh-and-blood Mohican of the Stockbridge tribe. Stockbridge, located in western Massachusetts, was then populated by Christianized Mohicans. Joseph Pye was a sachem, or leader of the tribe, during the last half of the 18th century. Could this be the Joe Pye of plant legend? A second and critical clue arose with the search of early botanical texts. Confirming that everything of importance is always in the footnote was one in the 3rd and 4th editions, and only those editions, of the classic botanical text Manual of Botany by Amos Eaton, published in 1818. The two species called Joe Pye, from the name of an Indian, are in common use in the western counties of Massachusetts as diaphoretics and in typhus fever. President Moore of Williams College, now of Amherst, ascribes his recovery from a very alarming fever to the liberal and continued use of a tea made with these plants. Zephaniah Swift Moore was president of Williams College from 1815 to 1821. The college is just 34 miles north of Stockbridge. In 1817, Amos Eaton delivered a series of lectures there on botany and geology. Likely it was during this time that Eaton learned of Moore's success in treating his fever with the liberal and continued use of Joe Pye's weed. The nature of Moore's fever is unknown, and we cannot, of course, attribute any efficacy to his herbal brew on the basis of a single report, no matter how educated the source. However, it is entirely fair to accept the words of two gentlemen who supposed that Moore's illness had been cured by a plant which they knew as Joe Pye. But on one occasion while researching this topic, I got lazy, and I did a truncated search, S-H-A-U-Q, and came up with the variant spelling for this Stockbridge Indian, Shauquethqueat. It drops an A and adds an E. Searching on this name, one gets dozens upon dozens of documents on Joe Pye, alias Joseph Shauquethqueat. Letters to the mission requesting clothing. Letters seeking and giving advice on religious matters. Letters involving land sales. Even a receipt for a rum sale to Joe Pye personally, which we trust he used in the making of herbal remedies. But arguably of most importance is a letter from Joseph Pye to President George Washington, now in the National Archives. Thus we find that Joe Pye of plant fame was no myth, was most likely Joseph Shauquethqueat of Stockbridge, Massachusetts, and later New Stockbridge, New York. His tea, made from species of indigenous plants that even then were known colloquially as Joe Pye weeds, was used on at least one occasion to treat a white man, the president of Williams and later Amherst College, for an alarming fever. Thus, the legend that Joe Pye was an Indian treating colonists for typhus fever in Salem, Massachusetts in the 1600s is probably born from the fertile imagination of Catnip Bill. But the true story is just as compelling. That a Native American, Shauquethqueat, used a native plant to treat fevers in white settlers with whom he had close dealings. Joe Pye lived over 90 years, just a few years into the 19th century. His descendants can be found among the many Pyes of the Stockbridge Munsee tribe, now on a reservation in central Wisconsin. It's time that this Joe Pye be acknowledged as the origin for the names of plants well known to us today, that he is no fable, but a flesh-and-blood Native American who used native plants to effect cures, most likely in his own people, but also white settlers.